Hello everyone, and welcome to Stitched Together, Stories, Art, and Family at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. I'm Sarah Moore-Fillmore, Chief Curator and Deputy Director here at the Gallery, and we're in the exhibition Family Patterns. I'm joined by my co-curator, Aidan Gillis, Indigenous Arts Programmer, as well as artist Letitia Fraser and her mother, Rosella Fraser. This talk is taking place on Mi'kma'ki, a territory that the Mi'kmaq Nation have been stewarding since time immemorial. This land has ties to a series of peace and friendship treaties beginning in 1752, emphasizing the right for Mi'kmaq communities to access land-based practices in sovereignty, among other treaty rights. We ask that you take time regularly to acknowledge in gratitude the Indigenous territory you're currently tuning in from, and consider your part in treaty relationships.
Within Family Patterns, Letitia Fraser and Darcy Bernhardt's paintings build on traditional portraiture. Designed as a conversation between artists, their cultural rituals, family, and memory, Family Patterns understands motifs of home and as ancestral and contemporary memory keeping. Layering cultural and domestic references specific to both artists' lives, Bernhardt and Fraser draw upon the rhythms and patterns of speech, textiles, and their own community histories to express their identities and experiences through painting. Today we're pleased to welcome Letitia Fraser and her mother Rosella Fraser to speak about Letitia's artwork and narrative context. So welcome, Letitia and Rosella.
Thank you. All right, so a lot of my work has to do with the passing down of traditions, and quilts has been like the main I guess material form of that. So I was curious about the making of quilts and how my grandmother would have gone about making it, or do you have any memories of being a child while she was making them?
Oh, most definitely. You know, when I look at this particular pattern, this is one of the simpler ones, and she would have gone from between hand sewing quilts, and then eventually she got a Singer sewing machine, okay, so she could turn them out a whole lot faster. And but I mean, you know, if you remember yourself being a child and playing in blankets and things, well, that's what we would have had, would have been her quilt. So the quilts were everything from keeping you warm in these little, you know, poorly insulated homes, to, you know, I'm child number 13, so, you know, we would have been bundled up in this thing, you know, carrying on and playing and the whole deal, and, you know, Mom would have screamed at us to get out of her blanket or whatever, or get out of her quilt, because she was always industrious, she was always working, if you can imagine, with that many kids. So, but one of the best times that I remember about Mom is, you know, we are faith-based, and what she would do is, in passing down, you know, her faith and you know, in God to us, she would sit us all down while she could be sitting just sewing on a quilt, quilting or whatever, and she'd sit us down just to finally get some quiet. And she'd pull out the Bible, and of course she had this big giant Bible that was like this big. And so she'd read from the Bible, and then that way she would keep us, you know, quiet and entertained. And half the time we'd fall asleep right there at the bottom. Right there at the bottom of the quilt. And as you, I mean, I think back, and it was such a natural occurrence for her. Like, that's how she kept us busy. But it's also how she passed along, you know, these amazing images of the presence of God in our lives, right?
Did you guys ever take part in the making of the quilts with her?
Well, see, the thing about having 15 kids is that you really don't have a whole lot of time to teach. But if we could, once you got a certain age, like we call them the top tier sisters, they would have actually been given a little more instruction. Madeline, Hi-Yi, she would have learned to quilt before any of us. So you just naturally kind of saw people. As we got older, we just followed, you know, what they were doing. Right?
So my aunt Bolivia, who's this is one of her quilts, but she was talking about cutting out pieces and how you guys had like a basically an assembly line or helping her out.
Yep.
So you guys would cut the squares and you guys, or the triangles, the diamonds, and then all work together to, and then she would sew them, hand sew them together.
Yeah. So she'd, Mom would lay out the fabric, and we'd be given, you know, a spot or a station, and she'd keep an eye on us because, you know, kids. But we would start cutting the pieces out, and while we're cutting them out, she would be stitching them together. So, and then to make a square. So here, where you see one little square, we would have cut out the little squares, and while we're cutting them out for her, she's actually sewing them together, creating a little square, so that then eventually we saw the quilt being made.
And what were a lot of these made out of? Like all of these?
All of these, like all of this fabric would have been either disused or might have been donated fabrics from like the Salvation Army or places like that. They all would have been like hand-me-down. You know, she repurposed just about everything. So if somebody outgrew something, it went to the next kid, or if something had no more use, she would, you know, take the buttons off of them and set the buttons over here, and then that would become a quilt pattern, you know. So all of the pieces, as you can see, they're pretty random because they're coming from a shirt, or they're coming for a pair of pants, or an old pair of curtains. You know, that was exciting if you got old curtains, because of course that you'd have more material, right?
That's true.
And you could actually come up with a design. I don't know how she ever, you know, got the patience to kind of, you know, orchestrate things the way that she did.
Right. So this series came from a lot of research on ancestral trauma and generational trauma and your own childhood trauma, and I just started to look back further and further and further to things that were kind of out of our control in terms of being African Nova Scotian. And so I guess the question that I would have for you is, what was something, I guess, that a wound that may have been passed down that you tried to heal, that I think a lot of African Nova Scotians maybe have faced?
That's a deep question. I think in sharing the experience of being raised in need, like of not having, of poverty and of struggle, and all of those things, you know, people say it's like, you know, they make you stronger, and they certainly do, but along the journey there's some things like just even physical touch, like even having your mom have the time to give you a hug and to, you know, to let you know physically that the kind of love that she had for you deep inside. And of course, there are some wounds that your parents would have endured. Like my mom would have lost 2 little girls to a tragic house fire when she would have been in her mid-20s. And I can't even imagine what that would have felt like, or how you would have survived that, other than the fact that you did have 2 other living children that you had to care for. And I don't know how she did that, but what I recognize now as an adult is that that could very well have been the distance that I might have felt from her, and her inability to kind of shower that, you know, physical and emotional kind of love upon the rest of us. She showed us that she loved us in many other ways. But that was one of the things that as an adult, as you can remember, being mauled to death by me. And, you know, being, you know, just constantly kissed upon, whether you liked it or not. But that was one of the ways in which I was trying to heal it for myself was because of the fact that, that was to suffer that kind of loss and then to be able to have to deal with it over and over, it's unimaginable. And so I don't, when I look at it, I recognize her courage. But my journey, I had to do the total opposite.
Exactly.
I had to make sure, I wanted to make sure. And I look back and I think, well, she had 15 kids, who had time for hugs? She wiped your nose, she kept you clean and shiny. And so, in that way, but it took me my adult life to actually process all of that.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? And so the struggle was a struggle. It was their experience. And the fact that they dedicated to, their lives to making sure that, we were good people and we had faith. And we had skills and we had education. Yeah. And so
they may not have had time to have those conversations because a lot of this is about not speaking and not having those conversations that are necessary. But yeah, they didn't necessarily have any of that time. I couldn't imagine. Even as a grandchild, she was always busy and going,
Exactly.
She had so much going on, so. Yeah.
And I think the busyness might have been part of that survival too.
Yeah.
And you really didn't have time to pause.
Yeah.
And if I ever went up to and tried to have one of those kinds of conversations, she really didn't have a whole lot of time for that.
No.
Because her words would have been, give it to Jesus. Literally, but meaning every bit of it. We chuckle, but it's like this is where you take it.
Yeah.
Trying to have a deep conversation with her. It took her a long time to actually be able to really even talk about the death of her daughter. But we always knew about it.
But a lot of that stuff, is unimaginable for even myself to even fathom what it would be like to even process what their generation would even have gone through. Yeah. So I don't know that she would have had the words or known how to speak about it. So a lot of times kids give their parents a hard time, or you look back and think, how did I end up with all this baggage or whatever? But it was because they didn't necessarily have the tools to do that.
Yeah,
So,
I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely. When they sat down, part of the healing was sitting down to a good meal. Sharing a cup of tea with your neighbors.
Yeah.
And as I remember back when I was smaller, those kind of conversations, they got together and they just shared the tea. Sometimes there wasn't even conversation, Not that we would have been around to hear them, because we would have been out of there, right? So, but when I look at the paintings, that's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the unspoken words, but within culture, you learn how to express yourself without words. So it's in a look, it's in your posture, and you learn to read those as a child too, right?
Yeah. So with this painting, this was ultimately a thank you to my great aunt, Lillian Downey. But a lot of my work is surrounded around seniors and the elders of the community, and the importance of them in our community. A lot of our history, I recognized in myself there was a lot that I didn't know about myself because I didn't know my own history, and so I had to go do a lot of research, and there wasn't really much that I found, and so I realized that I had to go speak to a lot of elders just to know my own history and to know, where I came from and what it was like even for them to grow up. And so I guess I could ask you, what would you say the importance that seniors play in today, I guess?
Well, for our culture, Letitia, the seniors have always been integral in everything. So we, in the extended family model, you might have 4 generations living in one house.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is that everybody has a function. Everybody gets to contribute. So great-grandmom or grandmom might be sitting, her day might start out waking up and then going in the kitchen and helping out with breakfast, but they all were integral in the survival of that family. And of course, they are a connection to the past. Every time a senior passes from our community, we know that there's a link to all the seniors that have gone on before them that now is gone. Mm-hmm. So, and it's an unspoken history. And so trying to have that conversation is an urgent thing, right? They're so important. They passed along all the values that came from the ancestors from before. And as we do a little bit more history, research on our history, then we link, that culture to African culture, to, American enslaved people's culture. And it comes, and it's like you connect and you see how deep the roots are. And so each one of these elders, that's what they represent. They represent our link to the past, but they also, in an ideal society, our elders are vital to our existence even right now. Because when mom's too busy, then there's that other body, there's that other mom.
Yeah,
and
exactly. I do, yeah. She's my best friend.
Exactly. Yeah. When you look at this face, this little woman stood probably, if she was 5 feet tall,
if that, yeah.
If she was 5 feet tall, worked all of her life.
This is the tallest she's ever been in her life.
Exactly. Worked all of her life, retired in her probably mid to late 50s, and then started raising you.
Yeah, yeah.
Literally raising you, and so patient.
Very patient.
When I wouldn't have been, she would have been so patient, and just encouraging always.
But she also started to teach me things that I have no interest in learning now, which was how to gut a chicken. Like in the city, like where she's gutting the chicken and she's pulling the things out. She's like, this is the gizzard, this is the heart. And I'm like, wow. But it was nice that she was even making that attempt to pass that down. That's all that she had for me, then was to cook for me and to pass that down. So I love her for that. I don't want to get choked up, but that is something I value, a memory that I really do value.
Well, and just think about it. You wouldn't have learned any of those things about the chicken.
No.
And that she actually cooked those things up and made them taste so good.
Amazing, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I'll never forget, because she lived in the city, but she was all country.
Yeah.
I'll never forget coming home from class one day, and there sitting in the sink was a full pig's head. A full pig's head. And I didn't know what to make of that, because I had never seen that. I grew up on a farm, but I had never seen that. And but she was going to make brawn.
Yeah.
And after that I couldn't eat brawn anymore. Because now I knew where brawn came from. Some things you don't want to know. Yeah. But she was she had so many abilities and skills. I mean, she did everything as well, and that's the link as well, is all those skills that they had to have because of the circumstances from which they were living. They passed those along, and even though we don't use them as much now, you know how they did it, through her. Right? And that's why it's so important for intergenerational activities and family gatherings to happen even today, is because of that, right?
So these paintings are based off of superstitions that would be in the community. These ones are kind of common. I think a lot of people know about these two. which was if you scratch your dominant palm, then you're going to be receiving money, so money coming in. And then if you scratch your other palm, or if your other palm is itchy, then that means that money is going to be leaving your hands. So I wanted to dive deep into superstitions and ultimately where they come from, just in this, just trying to explore my own culture more and understand just like the root of where a lot of these things come from. And so I found a lot of things. I found that I linked it back to African American hoodoo, which was mixed with the indigenous cultures there, as well as African cultures from the West Coast or the West Coast of Africa, and also a lot of traditions that they would have had there. So we're taught that a lot of these things are kind of witchcraft or negative, but ultimately they're linked back to our culture and our community. And so, yeah, it was probably the most fun I've had researching a lot of these superstitions, and I've had a lot of fun. I grew up with a lot of those superstitions. My nanny was very superstitious. If I swept too close to her feet, she would grab it and spit on it. I learned that the spitting of it was purifying, getting rid of the curse or whatever it was. I used to wake up covered in flaxseed, and flaxseed was to ward away evil. She used to line doorways with salt. All of this would be considered witchcraft, but she was protecting us, and I'm thankful to this day for it. So yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. What an incredibly rich conversation. It brings so much to the work on view and to our viewers. You've certainly given me so much to think about. So many stories embedded in these works. Thank you, Letitia, for sharing your work with us, and Rosella for sharing your stories with us. Aidan, thank you for your talents as co-curator. Please join us at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia.ca for future events related to the show, and have a wonderful day.